Kindly start, sir.
Distinguished members of prestigious India International Center and friends. Good afternoon. I'm Sanjay Kothari, ex-Central Vigilance Commissioner, speaking on behalf of India International Center. Civil service reforms in India, USA and Nigeria, 1950 to 2021 is the topic for the evening talk. You may be wondering, why did we choose this topic? First, and the most important thing is, as and when the time goes on, the reforms are required to meet the new challenges. The second reason was that we wanted to take one country from each continent. So we took USA from the North American or South American continent. We took India, our own country, from Asia, and we took Nigeria from Africa. We wanted to take one country from Europe as well, but then we found that it is difficult to manage 4 countries in 1 hour. The next reason was why we took USA, which is the most developed country, had a continuous presidential rule, except that in 1860, when the then president, there was some changes. As far as India is concerned, we have divided it into 4 phases. 2 we would be discussing. The first phase would be the 17th century till 1857. The civil servants during the then British Company. Then from 1857 to 1947, we had the British Empire. From 1947 to 1990, India merged out as a major country, and from 1990 till date. As far as Nigeria is concerned, it was, as you all know, was a British colony till 1960. They got independence, and from then onwards, they had the military rule that till 1999, and then a democratic rule. So it's an interesting mix of this sequence. As and when we go along, we can take a different configuration also. Another reason was that about a month back, we had a webinar with Meghna Sabharwal from University of Texas, where we discussed human resource reforms in America, in USA, Latin America, India, Nigeria, etc. So that is setting the context. Now let me introduce my dear friend, Mr. Srinivas. Mr. V. Srinivas is the Special Secretary in the Department of Administrative Reforms, and he is also Director General of National Center for Good Governance. In the IS term, he is from the 1989 batch of the IS and belongs to Rajasthan cadre. He has worked as collector in Pali and District Jodhpur in Rajasthan. From 2003 to 2005, he worked in IMF at Washington for an exposure. And recalling his days at the IMF, he has written a book, India's Relations with IMF, which narrates various facets of his experience. He has held senior position in government of Rajasthan and also in the various ministries in government of India. He was chairman Revenue Board from 2017 to 2018 and wrote an excellent book on Towards a New India, how the bureaucracy, how the system functions at the grassroots level, which is a very interesting reading. He is serving as India's representative at the Council of Administration of International Institute of Administration Science. Most interesting, Mr. Srinivas has 5 years to go as Secretary to Government of India. His batch has been empaneled, the batch has started. So you will run through the reforms. He would be seeing the reforms in the next 5 years, a very long tenure for any Secretary to Government of India. He is the recipient of a Digital India Award, and in addition to the 2 books which I have mentioned, He has 172 papers and 75 oration to his credit. He's a keen sportsman. All officers are very, very keen about the sports. He has been national junior badminton champion. He's an institution builder par excellence. So broadly, this is what I had to say. Let me tell you the format. I would now pass on the mic to my colleague, Mr. Srinivas. What we propose is she would be doing a presentation in the next 25 minutes, which would be take us to around 4:30. Then we would take question one by one, looking at the questions, and we would be trying to sum it up at 4:55. Thank you. Over to my friend, Mr. Srinivas.
So very good afternoon, sir. It's indeed a great privilege to speak at the India International Center. And let me thank Shri Sanjay Kothari ji for graciously accepting my invitation to chair this session and for the kind words that he said about me. Over the last 3 years, I've had numerous interactions with Sanjay Kothari ji, and I've known him personally for over a decade. And we often discussed how the civil servants should find themselves a renewed sense of commitment in the march towards New India. We also share the passion that India needs a strong civil service, particularly one that has a determination to deliver services on time. So leadership, talent, and also performance were subjects that we had often discussed in numerous interactions. So I had, when the subject was offered to me to speak by the IAC, he was the first person whom I approached with the request to chair this session. I have a PowerPoint presentation for you, and I'll request the host to kindly share the PowerPoint presentation. The subject of today's talk, as the chairperson has introduced, is civil service reforms in India, United States, and Nigeria. Next, please. The contents are as follows. I'll present a brief overview on the international experience and lessons, the milestones in civil service reforms, particularly those in India, and then go to the United States, and then to Nigeria before a concluding slide. Next, please. The international experience and lessons are very important. In fact, the Second Administrative Reforms Commission did study the international experience of the civil services in several countries, including the United Kingdom, Australia, France, Singapore, and Japan. It is also well known that governments across the globe have sought to reshape bureaucracies to suit technological and economic requirements. And they've set up a series of commissions and committees to look at how civil servants can perform their duties better. So in this, as we have, our chairperson has already indicated, we've identified 3 countries, India, United States, and Nigeria, to analyze and extrapolate the experiences and changes that have been witnessed. So a 21st century civil service should be one which attracts meritocracy, the best talent, and delivering world-class services. It's also expected to be honest, objective, impartial, and act with integrity. It should command the confidence and respect of citizens that they serve and should be valued and respected by ministers as trusted advisors. Next, please. So these are the major milestones that I'll present to you across the 3 countries that we have studied today. And the first one is recruitment should be by competitive examination. In India, the recruitment by competitive examination was introduced in 1855 following the Macaulay Committee report in the East India Company years. In the United States, it was introduced in 1883. In Nigeria, the recruitment still continues by interviews. In terms of economic deregulation, the Indian economy witnessed deregulation in 1993. In terms of the United States, the New Deal was the first time when deregulation was introduced. But thereafter, the 1970s marked a sharp turn towards establishing regulatory administration and massive deregulation of their government systems. Nigeria, the kind of economic liberalization was witnessed much later in 2004. In terms of regulatory administration and the buildup of regulatory agencies, strengthening of regulatory agencies, the Indian experience has been in the years 2000 to 2014. The American experience dates us back by almost 25 years. Between 1978 to 1991, the regulatory administration and their agencies will strengthen. In Nigeria, we witness it much later in 2012. And what we witness today, the rise of the digital state in India in the years 2014 to 21, wherein which so many Aadhaar-enabled governance practices have come in, was witnessed in the United States a decade earlier in terms of the social security numbers being introduced. In Nigeria, it is being taken up currently. Next, please. In terms of the recruitment process, India has the Union Public Service Commission, where the All India services and the central services are recruited. Equal opportunity through merit-based examinations are given. In the United States, federal government employees are selected through competitive exams and merit-based examinations by usajobs.gov. They earlier had a Civil Services Commission. And Nigeria has a federal service recruited by the Civil Services Personal Management Board through an interview method. The age of recruitment in India is 32 years. It was raised after a series of reports. In the United States, it is 35 to 37 years, and in Nigeria, it's about 45 years. So the age of recruitment is a very important criteria. Next, please. In terms of the major milestones, compensation, recruitment and selection, training, performance, and management, these were areas that have enthused successive governments across these three countries of study. The first Administrative Reforms Commission in India was conducted in 1969, and the second ARC was held in 2008. And the United States had the Pendleton Act of 1883 and the Civil Services Act of 1978, which replaced it. Nigeria had witnessed a transition from a democracy to a military era and then again to a democracy. So the military era reforms of 66 to 99 and civil service reforms of 2000 to 2020, these are what have been presented. Next, please. So before I go to the civil service reforms in India, I do have a slip from the chairperson saying that please mention that questions should be put in chat box. If any colleague has a question, kindly place it in the chat box. So the civil service reforms in India are largely based on the vision of Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. And Sardar Patel envisaged that the civil services will be the steel frame of good governance of India. And he further said that it will be your bounded duty to treat the common man as your own. So governance must look at the last man in the queue and ensure that quality services are delivered to him. Next, please. So we have the superior services organized as the All India services, the central services, and we do have the provincial civil services. And the All India services were recruited by the Secretary of State to serve in any part of India in the British time and currently recruited to the Union Public Service Commission. We also had a number of central services in the British Raj which continue and are duly recruited through a competitive examination under the UPSC's civil services examination. Next, please. We've had more than 50 committees and commissions conducting these studies and looking at how civil services reforms should be undertaken. The first such report was prepared by Mr. A.D. Gorwala, the report on public administration in 1951. And Gorwala said, integrity is the cardinal principle of public administration. And I'm glad that the CVC is sharing this session, and he's a man who has pursued this objective of ensuring integrity and preventive vigilance practices across government. The second major report was Paul Appleby's Public Administration in India, a report of a survey which resulted in the creation of the Indian Institute of Public Administration. The Santhanam Committee report on prevention of corruption resulted in establishing the Central Vigilance Commission. Thereafter, we had the second Administrative Reforms Commission report, which was prepared over a period of 4 years. Next, please. The first ARC, under the chairmanship of Mr. K. Hanumantaya, former Chief Minister of Karnataka, was patterned on the lines of the Hoover Commission of the United States. And it looked at two major ideas: changing the nature of administration from law and order to development administration, and of course, an overhaul of the machinery for attaining a socialist pattern of society. So the first ARC worked for 4 years and had a wide mandate. Next, please. We've had a number of committees looking at civil services examination reforms. The Kothari committee of 1976 was the one in which I wrote my examination. It had two optional papers for the main examination and two language papers. The Kothari committee's recommendations were further examined by the Satish Chandra committee, and they introduced an essay paper and also increased the marks for the personality test. Thereafter, in 2001, the Yogendra Alak committee introduced objective papers in preliminary examination, and also further changes were made in the main examination and in the interview pattern. Next, please. Next slide, please. The second Administrative Reforms Commission was established in the year 2008. But before that, there were a series of the liberalization necessitated a number of civil service reforms. And the objective of these reforms was to unshackle the Indian economy from the cobwebs of unnecessary bureaucratic control. So it led to a number of new policies being created: a telecom policy, amendments in the Highways Act, National Mineral Policy, a Disinvestment Commission, and of course there was the massive change through the 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment Acts that the decentralization and empowerment of Panchayati Raj institutions was witnessed. Next, please. The second Administrative Reforms Commission prepared 15 reports, and it looked at a number of issues. The predominant amongst them were citizen centricity, creation of CPGRAMS portals, right to information, citizen charters. There was a lot of emphasis on ethics and accountability in governance, and of course, rigorous selection processes for officers from top to middle management levels. And they also wrote a volume on promoting e-governance, the smart way forward. Next, please. What we witnessed in the post-liberalization era was that regulatory governance models were strengthened. So India established a number of new regulatory bodies: the TRI, SEBI, the Pension Funds Regulatory Development Authority, the Forward Markets Commission, the IRDA. Then we had the Central Electricity Regulatory Authority, the Competition Commission of India, Airports Authority. So we witnessed a plethora of regulatory authorities wherein which ministries shed their regulatory responsibilities and they were given to a neutral regulator to ensure a level playing field. A downsizing of government through corporatization, that is rationalization and reorganization of government institutions, was observed. Flatter organizations was the norm. Performance monitoring and evaluation systems through the results framework documents by introduction of a performance management division in the Cabinet Secretariat was introduced. Next, please. What we witnessed in the last 7 years is India's transformation from a low capacity state to a high capacity state. This has largely been possible through Digital India. And in terms of civil services, there have been intensive reviews being taken up for premature retirements, multi-source feedback and senior appointments, a national recruitment agency for conducting a common examination for all the subordinate services, a mission Karma Yogi, which focuses on the ensuring a role-based character for civil services. A capacity building commission has been established to look at how training programs are being taken up. There's a discontinuation of interviews for Group C and Group D positions, and self-certification for appointments has been permitted. So these represent significant changes in the way civil service reforms have been undertaken. Next, please. Also, the citizen centricity has become extremely important. Next slide, please. So we've had a number of new acts coming into play. And the Right to Information Act represents a huge change in the way the citizen interacts with government. And Right to Public Services Acts have been enacted by several states, and citizens have been empowered through e-services. There are more than 1150 e-services available on the Umang platform. We have now centralized grievance portals both in states as also in the central government. And institutional structures have been built like the Right to Service Commissions, the Central Information Commission, and the National E-Governance Plan currently has 44 mission mode projects. We also have social audits and social accountability mechanisms which continue to be strengthened. Next, please. In terms of citizen-centric governance, currently 68,000 grievance officers have been delineated on the CP-Grams portal. And there have been integration of state portals with CP-Grams, integration of district portals with CP-Grams, and also feedback call centers have been operationalized, particularly to receive feedback during the COVID times. Digital India presents a campaign which transformed India to a digitally empowered society. And today, what we witness is technology progress in many welfare state programs. And further, the technology has been adopted by India's rural societies. Abolition of interviews for recruitment to lower level posts represents a huge change, as also self-attestation. Next, please. Mission Karma Yogi is a subject that is of considerable interest to many training institutions. It's a new capacity building scheme for civil servants aimed at upgrading post-recruitment training mechanism for officers and employees of all levels. So Mission Karma Yogi seeks to radically improve the government's human resource management practices. And it uses state-of-the-art infrastructure. So there's a technology platform like iGot that has been developed to implement the new age capacity building programs. And the Capacity Building Commission has been in constant interaction with various training institutions. Next, please. Let me turn to the second country that we present today. The United States of America's civil service has a long and highly distinguished history. So I'll present to you how the civil service operated in the United States of America. Next, please. The early roots, President George Washington is usually credited with developing a competent public service. And President Jefferson, however, wanted to reward his followers with appointments. So that led to the creation of a spoils system. Next, please. Next, please. Next slide. So between 1829 and 1883, the American political system was recruiting and offering government jobs on a patronage basis. And it basically brought in officers of their own choice, whomever they wanted at various levels, and they were working. And the spoils system of government was somehow rejected by 1883. They felt that it was based on too much of partiality as also arbitrariness. So they wanted to put in place a meritocracy which was based on a written competitive examination. Next, please. So after President Lincoln, the spoils system started losing its attraction, and there were various associations which favored civil service reform, which put pressure on political leaders and tried to educate the public about the evils of spoils. Next, please. So the Pendleton Act of 1883 represented the first major reform. And the Pendleton Act was moved in the Senate by George H. Pendleton, and it aimed at a personal recruitment system based on merit. So under this act, a Civil Services Commission was created, competitive examinations and educational criteria for employment were created, lateral entry for any level was created. Next, please. The Pendleton Act created what was called a Civil Service Commission, and the Civil Service Commission was the institution that was responsible for conducting the merit-based examination. By 1978, next slide, please. By 1978, the Civil Service Commission was dissolved, and it was based on the recommendations of a scientific management era of Frederick Taylor, who said that let us try and achieve the best of organizational and individual efficiency and streamline personal management. So they replaced the Civil Services Commission, next slide please, by what was called an Office of Personal Management and a Merit Systems Protection Board. So these two institutions were introduced, wherein which in case an officer was aggrieved that his merit was not recognized, he could go and appear before a Merit Systems Promotion Board. And the Office of Personal Management was responsible for coordinating the government's personal program. They also introduced a senior executive service and a labor relations authority, which looked at some of the service conditions of a senior executive service. Next, please. After 1978, there was the Walker Commission, and Walker Commission's report is fascinating reading. But before the Walker Commission, they had two other important commissions. One was the Hoover Commission that was established in 1949, and then a second Hoover Commission that was established in 1953. And the private sector survey on cost control was undertaken by the Grace Commission. The Walker Commission is a very important document, and as I went through several aspects of the Walker Commission, I found one quote that I thought I should share in this forum. And this is a quote that Walker has picked up from President Kennedy. And he says that let the public service be a proud and lively career, and let every man and woman who works in any area of our national government, in any branch, at any level, be able to say with pride and honor in future years that I served with the United States government in that hour of nation's need. So based upon this, the Walker Commission made a series of far-reaching recommendations on improving service effectiveness at every governance level. And in fact, it's a fascinating read in terms of how a national sense of commitment for public service was tried to be built by Walker. And thereafter, there was another commission which looked at the provincial administration that was called the Winter Commission of 1993. And then a national performance review, which was again a very comprehensive effort, that was taken up in Vice President Al Gore's time. And the opening remarks of the Vice President's report begin with President Clinton's remarks that the intent of this NPR was to invent government that puts people first by serving its customers, empowering its employees, and fostering excellence. These are very similar to the objectives of the Indian civil service. We put people first. When you look back and see what Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel said, it's exactly what President Clinton says 40 years later. Next, please. In terms of the government reforms, there was decentralization, performance-based pay being introduced, declassification and broadbanding of the services, also deregulation, employment at will, so you could join it and go back to academia or private companies, come back to government. Privatization was introduced in a big way. In fact, the Al Gore Committee resulted in 24,000 employees moving out of government, and also several organizations being restructured. People were looking at smaller organizations, lesser red tape, so that they could move forward. They also have a huge number of states, and state level reforms have been taken up. And one of the big reforms that was taken up was by Florida, and which took the Service First initiative. And the Service First initiative of the Florida state actually focused on rewarding performance and providing more benefits and choices for employees, as also continue protections and patronage against patronage and discrimination. So each state had its own civil service laws, which was aimed at improving the efficiency levels of their service. Next, please. One of the big differences between the Indian civil servants and the American civil servants is the nomination of federal officers by the President of the United States. The President of the USA makes key administrative nominations. In fact, several assistant secretaries, undersecretaries, deputy secretaries, as also secretaries in the rank of ministers are nominated officials. And the nominations are subject to Senate confirmation. Next, please. The raging debate in the United States is on how the reforms shall be shaped up. And as the chairperson mentioned, we did have a session with Professor Meghna Sabharwal, and these were some of the issues that were highlighted. How are these reforms going to impact workplace culture, employee motivation, satisfaction levels? How will employment at will be attractive to younger workers? The impact on business practices in government, and also how to make government an attractive sector for newer generation of highly qualified workers. And how do you make government work better for citizens? Next, please. Let me turn to Nigeria. Nigeria is a very interesting country for civil service reforms. And can you go to the next slide? Nigeria's reform structure was history runs similar to India's. Only thing is that it postdates India by a few years, and that an indigenization of the Nigerian civil service happened several years after it was a British colony. And the Nigerian civil service pre-independence was dominated by low wages, lack of inclusion of Nigerians in the senior cadre of civil service. There was distinctive hierarchies, harmonization of wages was not being seen. Next, please. Some of the key features post-independence that were introduced was decentralization of administrative authorities and powers. They were made, it was an apolitical service, and hiring and promotions were largely through competitive exams. But thereafter, it went into the current recruitment pattern is based on interviews. The norms of impersonality and hierarchical authority were well changed. And there was a need to increase the wages. So they had a number of commissions to look at wage rise. Next, please. These are some of the commissions that Nigeria had, and most of them looked at how wages would be increased, how grading systems would improve, and how the public services would become more efficient and effective. Next, please. Between 1966 and 1999, Nigeria had military rule, and under military rule, the civil services degraded and they became highly politicized. And political factors rather than merit played a major role in the civil service. And there was an introduction of a quota system in terms of recruitment and promotion. So regional representation was given quotas. Hiring was based on federal character rather than on merit or competitive exams. There was a huge expansion of the civil service, massive increase in personnel, and frequent changes in top officials and terminations was being seen. Next, please. So a number of reforms were taken up under military governments, and the quota system was introduced, as I said. Further, the regime also had federal character, so they would identify which state would take in how many. And civil servants were appointed and dismissed at will. And also, the dismissal of previous government's civil servants was widely seen. Next, please. When democracy was restored in 1999, then demilitarization of the civil service was an important aspect. And they tried to restore the office of the head of civil service of the Federation, similar to the cabinet secretary. A pooling system was introduced wherein which officers of high merit could be pooled together and identified for sensitive jobs. The institution of centralized, coherent, and systematic training was introduced, as also in terms of structures and functions, the Public Service Department's National Planning Commission was created. Next, please. So these were the major reforms that were taken up between 2000 and 2010. The Obasanjo government lasted for a very long period of time, and restructuring of pilot ministries and departments happened under the Obasanjo government. Then we had the next set of reforms happening was in 2009, wherein which organizational efficiency, professional ethics, and accountable workforce was created. And the third stage was an area wherein which reform centers for privatization was introduced. So agencies were abolished and several agencies were converted into departments. Next, please. The major issues that Nigeria faces currently are in terms of poor remuneration packages of civil servants. I think that is one thing that repeatedly has been said by several Nigerian civil servants. And they also have lower qualification and limited relevant experience. So there was an acute need for specialization rather than have an unqualified, inexperienced civil service. So that was one area that they were looking at. And corruption was a major area of concern for them. And there was a feeling that civil servants in Nigeria are likely to achieve their pockets and promote corruption owing to lack of financial accountability. So there was also concerns about ethnicism and tribalism and negative attitude to work. So one of the major areas when you look at the ARC reports is employee motivation, combating corruption. These are major areas of Indian reform, and these are currently underway in Nigeria. Next, please. So the way forward for the Nigerian civil service as presented by them was e-governance and improving performance management, as also rigorous selection process and mid-career trainings to develop the needs of public officers of all levels. Next, please. Let me conclude with one slide and the next, please. What are the common areas that the civil service has? When you look at the history of civil services across three major nations, there are features of continuity and change. One is the common agenda of reforms is being pursued across the nations is result-oriented civil service. Red tape to increasing output is a common agenda that we see across the international experience. In terms of key areas of reforms, recruitment, age of entry, training, tenure, domain competency, performance management systems, these remain key areas of concerns. Citizen-centric governance is a feature that has been the concern across all three countries, spreading over several decades. How do you increase the accountability of civil servants to the citizen? And reducing the number of services, as in the case of what we have seen in terms of the Ministry of Railways in India. We have a number of central services even in Nigeria where they're trying to reduce the number of services and integrate services. And moving towards minimum government, this is what Volcker tried to do, this is what Al Gore tried to do in the US, and this is what the second ARC tried to do in India. And disinvestment, privatization, and bring in more greater regulation and competition into the system, simplify procedures, increase the ease of doing business, and also higher levels of commitment, that is empathy for vulnerable sections of society, impartiality and objectivity in all public dealings. So these are the areas which represent continuity and change over the past 75 years. So let me thank all of you once again for joining this session. Particularly, let me thank Shri Sanjay Kothari for graciously accepting my invite to be the session chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Shri, for an excellent presentation. Now we can have some questions. Do we have any question in the chat box? Till you frame your question, I can just mention that the Qatari committee mentioned in the examination has got nothing to do with me. And it's a sheer coincidence that the surnames are common.
You could express your views on how you see continuity and change across the decades of service that you have in terms of civil services.
If there are no questions, let me just mention 2 or 3 very important things which emerged out of this presentation. If we look at the 3 services, the competitive exam, the partial in the competitive exam was started in India in 1855. And surprisingly, which I didn't know earlier, that USA started only in 1883, and Nigeria, of course, is a different case. The other thing on the citizen centricity, which is a very, very important aspect which has been mentioned by Mr. Srinivas, is that the interview system has been done away with. This is how the public trust is won over. In fact, it is non-gazetted B, C groups, which consist of almost 90 to 92% of the employees. Because Group A generally consists of 4 to 5%. Group B gazetted is another 4%, and it has maintained a lot of trust in the system. Whether something happens or not, the whole idea of having some flexibility in the interview does lose a lot of trust in the system. Age has been talked about quite a bit, and we compared the ages. Age, in fact, the second ARC did mention up to 24, but then over a period of time, it went up to 32 to 36. Very talked about thing. Integrity has been mentioned as the main thing. There were issues, and when the economy opens out, there is a change. And whenever there is a change, the integrity takes the thing, things are becoming better. A lot of people are, a lot of emphasis is done on integrity. In fact, the main thrust is that even if you have to even if you have to forego a very bright person, if the integrity is doubtful, do so. But there's no compromise on integrity. So that's an important aspect. And when I was looking at the thing, USA 1993 algorithm said the same thing from red tape to what we output. And that is the emphasis here also, accountability and output. Whatever has been assigned to you, please complete in the time assigned to you. Don't refer it to one ministry to another ministry, personal to law, to finance, and whatever has to be done has to be done. A lot of debate on lateral entry that you can see from the three presentation is interesting aspect. That's what I had to say. Any questions? Or Mr. There can be two options in this. Either it has been, there is, yeah, let's have this. We can't see any question.
There are two questions.
Yeah.
One is why was Nigeria included in the comparison? And how much do these civil services cost? What is the share of government expenditure? So Nigeria was included in comparison. We looked at a range of countries, as I said. Second ARC focused on France, United Kingdom, France, Singapore, as also Australia. In fact, we did have a bilateral with Australia, which I and Kothari shared a session. And we thought we'd select across three continents, the Americas, Africa, and Asia. And that was how we formulated this particular talk at the IAC. So we wanted an African nation to be included in this discussion. And in terms of costs and sharing of government expenditure, an assessment has not been made. These are constitutional functions being seen as mandatory requirements of the state. But there has been an information in repeated pay commissions that there should be restructuring of government and the number of government entities should be brought down. Greater emphasis should be given to outsource. So there are some more questions.
Yeah. There's the last question. Let me attend to the last question. Is there any data evidence from other countries that suggests that the age of candidates makes a difference in the performance of the civil servant? We did give you a table showing the age in various countries. Now, there's a lot of debate about age thing, and we have not gone into these details whether the age is having an impact or not. But this forum is still open, where we have raised certain issues in the paper, which has been done by Professor Meghna Sabharwal. We can look at it. Yeah.
One is corruption is in states, from Qatari to Deputy Commissioner, District Collector. What does the ARC say about? In terms of corruption, there are bodies, which has been CBC, considered against corruption. India has adopted a zero tolerance approach to this. Strong institutional structures, including the Prevention of Corruption Act, in terms of property returns being filed before property returns, and also in terms of civil servants not private sector employment. So the ARC has reiterated the objectives of zero tolerance to corruption. Reiterated
the Administrative Reforms Commission has reiterated these aspects of having a zero tolerance to corruption. However, Mr. Kothari has been a Central Vigilance Commissioner, and we would like to add some views on this.
Yeah, this is a very interesting question. Corruption, we are looking at systemic changes. Wherever the system is faltering, we are looking at these changes. Some things we have done through digital means, like Jamabandi, etc. You can take a digital copy. So, in fact, in the 1.25 year, we were looking at systemic changes, taking the systemic changes from the public, asking the concerned ministry, asking the concerned officers how to plug it. That was one. Second was a lot of emphasis on training. People do make a mistake because they are not aware of the procedure. So what we had suggested was to sensitize them. That's not your money, it's public money, you have to be transparent. The third area which we looked at was the attitudinal change. In fact, my own feeling is government gives you enough to have a decent living. So we were saying that look at the best organization, go and visit DMRC, Delhi Metro with the same setup, but doing excellent work. Look at Amul. So that is another attitude. And the fourth and the most important, which was whosoever is caught, we made it time bound. We're trying to complete the inquiry in 1 year and punish it. All backlog, 99% of it has been cleared so that it is an exemplary punishment. But the main thing, the main emphasis has to be on the attitude. The systems have to change so that to bring in a more concrete system. We couldn't understand this question. Has the expenditure on the services in India changed over time? Expenditure at present, we would not like to comment. And the last that I see, do you think good governance can, do you think outdo corruption and increase public trust and can be by to reforms for future? Yeah, that's what I mentioned, all the 4 points. That if the governance is good, if your communication is good, if your systems are working, if most of the things are on digital, I feel that there would be less corruption. A link of the paper mentioned by you. We'll share this.
And they want also to know the buying reforms for future administrations. So the big reforms, as has been discussed, is of course digital governance. How do you build digital institutions? Capacity building, Mission Karma Yogi is a very important reform, because a strong nation needs a strong public service, and a strong public service can only be built through meritocratic selling process, as also constant capacity building to reorient and learn new skills and unlearn the old skills. So this is the big sector civil service reform as we move forward. And that is the reform process that is being seen across the world. We've completed the questions.
Just to add to this, the level of commitment was assured in the presentation. The level of commitment probably has to increase. This has been mentioned in the US paper also, that instead of passing things from one end to another, whatever work has been assigned to you, please complete it. And if you think that the work which has been assigned to you, you would like to have a look at it, you can raise it initially. But once it has been assigned to you, I think we should complete it in the given time and keeping in view all the constraints. So this has 2 parts. One is the accountability. Just passing it from one desk to another won't do any good. And the second is output oriented. The road has to be built, it has to be built. And whatever time has been given, it has to be given. Otherwise, if there is a post measure, then time is obviously more time is obviously. But systemic changes would make a change, and attitude is a major factor.
What's a message from Professor Vigilance from Central University, Jammu? Says he's not able to post on chat. We're asking to text it. So pick it up in case the question comes in. Otherwise, the host has said there are no further questions from the audience.
If there are no other questions from the audience, let me just sum up. In fact, it has been an interesting experience. How the whole thing emerged was, we have been talking about training, we have been talking about various subjects, and we thought that let us compare it with other countries, what is happening in other countries. And that is how we opened this subject. Nigeria we took because it was an emerging country. And we also wanted to know, we all in the world are at different level of development. And that is how we worked it out. And in the, we are continuing with that discussion. The 2-3 other things which we are talking with them is, we probably India and some other countries will be having a district administration. I understand a lot of collectives are also online. So we have asked them, please tell us what sort of a local administration do you have? How do you make it more transparent, etc., which will take in the next phase. The other thing which we propose to discuss in the next round is, we recently has faceless calculation in income tax. We also flagged this issue that how many countries are doing it and how are they doing. The third area which we thought we would look at is training, both attitudinal and general, and is everyone, and whether everyone has a induction training and regular training. Training plays a very, very important role. And if you train, the people have the basic qualification, they're taken through a transparent exam, and somehow if they are regularly trained, they would be very useful. But somehow I feel that the training in the developing and emerging countries is not being taken seriously. In fact, at times we have acute shortage of staff, and people say, give us the staff without training. Believe me that if you take people who are not trained, they are no good. So wherever I went, even in the banks, we started induction training for the simple reason there's a lot of difference between college and a job. In college, you are excused for everything. In job, you are not excused for anything. And that is one great achievement which we made, that in the banks, every manager would be trained for 1 year. The Honorable Finance Minister launched it on 1st October 2020. And another thing was, before 1.5 years of service, they would not be given independent charge. But that is a major step. Seek the best practices, seek the best thing, motivate people. And these are the people, this is a wealth which we should conserve and somehow manage and see that how best we can take out from them. The target of all senior people is to take out the best from the people, to train them, motivate them, do whatever you want, but take out the best from your employees. They're all very good people. The major reason is they don't understand the bosses. Wherever there are frequent changes, they don't understand the priorities. And somehow you have to communicate with them, train them, increase their skill. Let me sum up if Srinivas says so. I know a very interesting organization, very, very good organization, brought a lot of computerization in the country, but during a long period, due to certain reasons, they were not trained. So they became mediocre, and now they are being trained. So it's again a very shining. Things are changing very fast, and if we don't train our staff, I'm afraid we will not be in a position to cope up with the challenges that the country or the world is facing. Mr. Srinivas, would you like to add something?
Quite right, sir. But there's one question that has been received. There is one question that has been received on the genesis of civil services in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka are the same. And I would appreciate if the speaker can, through some comments and views about the development of civil services in other South Asian countries born out of British India. The history of the civil service dates back to 1834, when the British East India Company used to appoint civil servants through writerships. And they were initially trained at the Haileybury College in London. And they were largely generalist youngsters who came from Oxford and Cambridge and came at a very young age. Initially, the age of recruitment was 21. And between 1834, when the capital was shifted from Kolkata to Delhi, and 1855, when the first civil service examination was conducted, the East India Company merely gave writerships to civil servants. And thereafter, in 1855, after administrative thinkers like Macaulay came in, the first civil service examination was introduced. Even thereafter, the Indian civil service was largely British in character. And the indigenization of the Indian civil service happened much later in the 1900s, when there was a shortage of British officers coming into the system. It was always envisaged that generalist officers, the service would be generalist in nature, and the service would bring in graduates who would then specialize into law, because it was felt by Macaulay that the best jurists were those who read law after they had graduated and as an in-service training. That ethic continues to this day, wherein which young officer trainees from the Indian Administrative Service undergo massive trainings in rules of law, be it the Indian Penal Code, Code of Criminal Procedure, Indian Evidence Act, as also in terms of state laws subsequently during their district attachment. The indigenization of the Indian civil service also resulted in separation of the streams. There was a judicial stream separately and also an executive branch of government. So those who wanted to work in the judiciary went on to become district judges, while those who wanted to work in the executive branch of government went on to become district collectors. So the district collectors institution is one that has tremendous amount of historical importance attached with it. So 1947, when the number of all India services was brought down to two, the Indian Administrative Service and the Indian Police Service. Thereafter, the Indian Forest Service was introduced, and the number of central services was brought down to 24. So this was how the recruitment was taken up entirely through the UPSC. And I've written extensively about the history of the civil service in India from 1834 to 2021. I'll be happy to share it with the panelists separately. Thank you.
Let me just add to this. I have a minute or two. In fact, I understand there are a lot of IS officers who are online. Recently, a book has been brought out on the history of the district officer by Mr. Matthew, 77 batch. He was the Chief Secretary Rajasthan. Very well researched book. If you have time, please go through it. There are 4 more volumes which are due to come. That is the district officer, his role as the district collector, his role as the district magistrate, his coordination role as the development officer known as deputy commissioner, and the last is interaction with politicians and others. Very interesting book. If you get time, you can go through it. Gives you how did the service emerge, how was it groomed, how was it envisaged. So that would be very interesting and would answer a lot of these queries. I did find some time and went through it very, very vividly. And for people who are very, very senior, a huge collection has been made on Mirror, where number of chief secretaries have reflected on their tenure as the chief secretary and starting from their days as under training. So these 2 books are very interesting. There would be a number of other books, but these 2 I recently read, so I thought, let me share it.
Questions from very senior colleagues.
Yeah.
There's a question from a very senior colleague, and I respect him immensely, so I thought I'll take up this. He wants to know how the civil services would be reformed, how much of the private sector characters would come into the civil service. Let me respond to this in this way, that I do recall speaking to Dr. Dugur Subbarao when I was formulating the Civil Services Day lecture of 2018. And I asked him, sir, how do you see the change in civil service between when he had served in the 20th century and when we are serving now in the 21st century? And what he told me was, Srinivas, there's no difference in the challenges that we face. Commitment to the larger public good against all odds is the overwhelming motto of the service. But as one sees, in terms of accountability levels, in terms of the oversight, there has been a quantum change, and the civil service today is far more accountable to the system. In terms of oversight, levels have never been so high ever in the past. So I think these are some changes that we have witnessed. Of course, economic liberalization has brought in a quantum change into our governance model, in that more and more regulatory agencies have come into play to ensure a level playing field between the private sector entities and government entities. Also, unshackling governance from the cobwebs of regulatory practices has been the other ethic. So there's one more on my WhatsApp chat from a very senior officer, and it says that how effective is the lateral system of work, and whether we can ever see the same effectiveness as was being witnessed in the United States. Now, currently we have 10 joint secretaries who have been recruited on the lateral system basis, and they bring in considerable levels of efficiency into the system, a different approach into the process-driven systems of governance. The current policy is to take it forward at deputy secretary levels also, and that process has not yet been complete. So a larger impact would be seen in the coming years. Thank you very much.
I think the questions have been answered, but just to add to this, the system in Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, etc., we would be looking at it when we do the international webinar. And on this lateral entry, everyone is guessing about it. But let me tell you that there's one more. You have seen the slide. We deliberately put this slide. But then using various organs of the government and the private sector is in vogue. People are trying. There's one area which I did not succeed much, but I'm still trying that somehow all the organs of the government should go ahead with which will assist the citizens of the country. So let us see how it goes. We all are trying our level best. What can be done, and some things are succeeding, somewhere we fail. Thank you very much for your time. We thought we'll have a lot of questions, so we made our presentations very thin. So I can guess two things. Either it was so boring that there were no questions, or you were liking it so much that there were no queries. So either way is fine with us, but it was a great learning for us. Thank you, Mr. Srinivas. Thank you, ISC, for all the help. Thank you very much. Namaskar. ISC, yes, sir.